So I'm going to start off. I'm Andy. I'm the lead Microsoft CSA aligned to Lloyds Banking Group. And to be honest, I'm a bit of a fraud. I've got my name on the agenda. But I've got a single chart to very quickly set the scene for the next presentation. And I think it's fair to say that we've had a long-standing partnership between Lloyds and Microsoft. So most Lloyds businesses using a large part of Microsoft's technology stack back to this traditional on-prem days, but also increasingly into the cloud space. Great example of that I wanted to just point out is Microsoft Managed Desktop, so MMD, something that we had a very exec level partnership around, and was something which was a key accelerator in Lloyd's journey to Windows 10 and Windows 11. So a great example where we worked together to give Lloyd's something which met their needs. Like most banks, Lloyd's have a hybrid approach with on-prem and several public cloud providers, but they've got a long established use of Azure across multiple landing zones, importantly with a breadth of production applications deployed in there. So, I like to think that Azure was their first cloud. And a great example, the latest successful project, the one we're going to talk about today, to go live in Azure was AVD. So, they've got almost 15,000 colleagues regularly using AVD to give sort of virtual Lloyds MMD managed devices for their day-to-day activities. And also, I think AVD is a great example of our partnership. So this is all about, us as Microsoft bringing the right people to you, to our customers, to help, you be successful in your projects. So, in the case of AVD, we had people like me from the CSU and CSAEs and CSAMs. We had people like Ian from the CAT team, with the MMD team. And we had, importantly, lots of engagement with the AVD product group and engineering to make sure that we were meeting Lloyd's needs. And then ultimately, this is all delivered and led by the Lloyds Bank Modern Workplace team. And so, yeah, absolutely delighted to have David along here today to represent that team, as the lead engineer on the project. He's been at the absolute heart of the partnership and the project's successful delivery. And importantly, he's got a really deep understanding of Lloyd's experience with AVD and the various lessons they've learned. And that's what he's going to share with us today. So that's me out of the way and handing over to David.
All right, showtime. Hi, everyone. Never presented to this many people before, so be nice. Right, let me press control. Hi, everyone. My name is Dafydd Watkins. I'm a lead modern workplace engineer with Lloyds Banking. I've been with the bank for about 1.5 years now. When I joined the bank, I was helicoptered quite literally on day one into the AVD delivery to help bring AVD to bear for Lloyds Banking. We currently have circa 14 to 15,000 devices now on AVD Personal, and we delivered that migration throughout 2022. And in 23 now, we're building on that capability to deliver multi-session and remote app, targeting an additional 14,000 users. So going to be quite a big estate by the time that we finished all of our various migrations into AVD. So for this talk, I'll be talking about what were our key requirements when we were thinking about the AVD platform, what were our guiding principles, so what wider strategies did we need to account for and that influenced our architecture in the end, why did we go for cloud VDI and indeed why AVD. Then I wanted to talk through some key technical decisions that I think anyone on the road to AVD will need to think about and consider. It's not an exhaustive list because there's lots and lots, but some of the key ones that I think are worth calling out. Then I'll get into talking a little bit about our architecture and then going on into some lessons learned and what we as Lloyds are going to be doing looking ahead for the remainder of 2023. So our journey originally started with AVD back in 2021, and some of the key requirements and outcomes for our new VDI platform were, as Ian was talking to, was to provide a standardized, secure platform that allowed people to work from home to be able to access our corporate applications and data. We wanted to introduce and start allowing BYO. We hadn't ever really done that before with personal laptops, so this was a paradigm shift for Lloyds Banking. We wanted a way of providing devices to offshore colleagues, particularly where providing physical kit was complicated, particularly places like in India, where supply chains are can be complicated when trying to manage it from Europe. And one of the other two more key ones I really wanted to call out was we wanted to move to a more transparent position around chargeback of our VDI services back into the wider organisation. It was quite difficult on our previous platform. And finally, we wanted to provide MS Teams to everyone in the bank, irrespective of what device you were using. So some of the guiding principles for Lloyds were around, and that wider strategy piece was that we wanted to adopt an end-to-end cloud-native modern workplace tool stack. Easier said than done. We're definitely not 100% cloud only, but we are well on the way, and that was spearheaded by the work we were doing with MMD around the Windows 10 piece that necessitated and forced the organisation to start using AAD is our primary IDP. That was a really important step forward to start modernising and cloudifying further pieces of our modern workplace services and architecture. As called out previously, we are a big E5 company, and so therefore wanted to make sure that where we had capability overlap, that we were exploiting our E5 position wherever it made technical sense and it was financially sensible. We wanted to adopt a ZTNA approach to access for all of our new services being implemented. Lloyds, as I'll get to in a little bit, have this concept of a route to live where we have multiple environments, and we wanted all of those environments to be representative as we tested change and promoted change ultimately into production. We probably, like a lot of you guys, have very stringent test plans that we need to follow, which typically inhibits rapid delivery of change into prod. So wanted something that we wanted a mechanism, a means, a way of providing our VDI platform ultimately with something that would, like I said, keep the environments representative, but allow us to deliver at pace. And then another call out here about MMD. We needed the VMs to be supported by MMD. We were one of the early supported VDI installations of AVD that was also supported by MMD. And then finally, just wanted to we wanted our as the entry point into requesting AVD related items and services in general across the modern workplace. We always want to send our users via our ITSM tool, which is ServiceNow. So why did we end up going for cloud native VDI rather than hybrid? The big piece for us was to decouple ongoing VDI support and hardware costs for on-prem hardware. We were as we exit, but we used to be a very large Citrix customer. We had vBlocks galore, multiple of them in different data centers, and that obviously had the associated hardware support, maintenance, overhead associated with that. We wanted to move away from that and focus more on the service itself. We have also have quite a elaborate and far-reaching partner network that provides services for Lloyds back into the bank. They are quite often not in the UK as well, and they can be of a technical nature. They may be more business unit aligned. A lot of those offshore locations needed to use an MPLS to connect back into our UK data center, then hit Citrix, then be able to go onward to a different application. We found that wasn't as performant as we would like, and represented lots of challenges. So there was a desire here to simplify. And then the common cloud benefits, I won't go into them, but very similar to what Ian was calling out earlier, just the ability to scale, to take advantage of the resiliency that you find in Azure. And the big piece as well for us was to get away from having switched off but ready to switch on DR devices, of which we had X% of coverage of what we had in production, which was costly in our Citrix estate and added complexity. Why did we end up going with AVD? lots of reasons here, but I'll speak to only a couple of them. I think one of the big drivers for us was that there's mature APIs, and that we were very keen, alluding to the multi-environment piece I mentioned earlier, that we wanted a programmatic and declarative way to deploy all of our AVD platform resources into all of those environments. We wanted some level of flexibility to be able to consume open source tools where we felt that capability set was the right for the organization, particularly thinking about image building with Packer, which is what we use for all of our clouds, not just Azure. And there was a wider governed strategy that said Packer was the tool for this particular capability, which we needed to fall in line with, and we were able to still use that as well as use AVD. Calling out just the really high integration between the wider Microsoft tool chain, whether it be security related, identity related, and so forth. Talking about MS Teams as well, there's the ability to do what is called MS Teams optimization, where it offloads the rendering of the voice and video onto the local device. We found that very, very interesting, particularly due to the earlier point I made around where we wanted to give MS Teams to everyone, and that wasn't true a couple of years ago in the bank. And then some other points very similar to Ian. It's almost like we wrote this together, but we didn't. But you know, we wanted to offload some of that overhead around the brokering layer and not have to worry about that, and instead focus on the AVD platform from a host pool, device image, and the VM itself perspective. Final call out is we identified that anecdote, from experience and usage of the RDP protocol, when we looked at that versus what was offered from Citrix, whilst I think it's fair to say that the Citrix protocol overall is probably still better, we found that RDP was good enough for our needs. And ultimately, as the further development continues on in that space by Microsoft, we're finding that for us, it's ever improving and certainly is fit for purpose. Actually, and the very last piece, the Lloyds scene is Azure Sentinel, and there's many ways in which we can take all the various telemetry, whether it be platform health related, security observability, or VM related, that we can quite easily get into a log analytics workspace and ultimately up into Azure Sentinel for security incident and response, or into a dashboard, so that we can visualize it and make calls about what are we doing with our platform. So moving on into some key technical decision points, which I think anyone who's wishing to adopt AVD should be thinking about and factoring in on your journey. The very first one, and I'll make this point loads of times throughout this chat because I'm a big fan of this, is that you need to make a call whether you're going to define your platform in code. I strongly think you should. It represents a different set of challenges if that is new for your organization and not familiar with those more let's call it DevOps principles, but there's a ton of benefit, and certainly if you have multiple environments to think about, I think it's the only pragmatic way forward, certainly at scale. If you do decide to deploy in code, then you'll need to start thinking about what's going to be your pipeline tool of choice. We're both a GitHub Actions and an Azure DevOps organization. Our particular AVD implementation, though, is on Azure DevOps. Similarly speaking, you'll need to think about what languages you're going to be using for your deployment. We ultimately ended up with Bicep. However, I think if we were going to do it again, there is new strategy within the bank that has rested upon Terraform, so perhaps we would be pushed down a Terraform route for that deployment. In either case, you can achieve enterprise scale as you desire with either language. And then you'll need to start thinking about where you're going to deploy, and this is highly contextual based on your organizational needs in terms of Azure regions. You'll have choices around whether you want to use regional failover in the case of outage, or whether you want to take advantage of availability zones. In UK South, there's 3 of them, and in the end, we decided to go with just UK South, but use an approach where we deploy a third of our VMs to one of the 3 availability zones there. And in that way, that gives us a level of resiliency if there's ever a challenge in one of those availability zones, but also the deployment capability that we can flip and go to it and target a particular zone if we need to, if another one's actually challenged for whatever reason. I think the next call out is what will you build and what will you buy? And the reason I call that out is that there's there is an awful lot of moving parts in an AVD platform, and you may decide that for yourself, dependent on the type of team and the skills that you have in-house, that you may wish to buy some of that capability rather than build yourself. A really strong provider in that space is Nerdio, and would definitely recommend exploring their offering if that was of interest. We went more down. We had already gone too far down our delivery route to consider Nerdio, simply because we just built half of it by that point. So we decided to stick with a build philosophy as a result. Consequently, we've built numerous PowerShell modules and functions to give us the capability augmentation that we felt we needed for the operational aspects of AVD. Next bit is around image management. What are you going to use to define your images? We went with Packer because of that broader strategy, but you could use Azure Image Builder or similarly linked to AIB. You've also got just declaring it with Bicep. You've got different choices and different approaches there. It will ultimately depend on how complicated your image needs to be. For us, we had a requirement that we needed a custom image, so we would take the marketplace one, apply our customizations on top, and then make that our base image that then would be provisioned off of for AVD VM deployments. That was mainly around the proxy. So we have a proxy that needed to be on the device before that VM was run. Otherwise, it would never get connectivity. Then you're in a chicken and the egg conundrum. And then the final bit is you might want to think about, as called out previously, is around express route. You have a choice around whether you have just one express route for all your workloads, let's say between connecting between Azure and on-prem. We decided, however, to go for a dedicated express route for client VDI versus what we did for servers, and that was because of the much higher bandwidth needs typically from a client VDI, and indeed just the sheer number of them that we've got in the estate versus servers. Some other areas to consider will be how many environments do you want to employ into? We've got 3. It's worth also thinking about what VM SKUs you're going to offer to your customers and sizing them according to need. We went with effectively a t-shirt size, small, medium, and large in the end. For the standard user type, we don't have any of our users doing any higher GPU intensive workloads. In other words, our creatives aren't at the moment on a VDI, so that allows us to have a relatively slim number of SKU options, but your mileage will vary based on your needs and requirements. And then there's loads of AVD configuration choices that you'll need to think about and go through that will be very specific to your needs. One of the ones I will call out though is that in terms of address space for our standard user subscription, let's say for AVD Personal, we went with a /21 VNet that gave us 2,000 IP addresses because that aligned pretty well with the various restrictions that you have in Azure when you deploy into a subscription. And it was a good balance within size versus the limitations. Those kinds of things evolve and change, however, so it is always worth reaching out to Microsoft if you're unaware of any of those things, or indeed just want the latest position. And then the last bit was around, and the last big decision is where you will send all of your telemetry to for platform health, security, all that kind of good stuff. I would advise perhaps splitting security traffic away and sending that to a separate law to where you would send traffic for your platform health and your VDIs themselves. I think it would give you more flexibility ultimately in how you want to access that data later, particularly around reporting. However, dependent on your wider strategy within Azure, you may indeed just have the singular one for an entire environment. So more to think about in terms of access and how you serve some of that data back out at the other end, if that's ultimately your approach. Right. Can you see my picture okay? Great. So what I wanted to do was just talk a little bit through what our environments look like at a high level, and just paint a little bit of a picture of how it all hangs together and some of the key components that give you an AVD platform. For us, as I talked about previously, there is we front and send all of our users from a service request perspective, and an incident for that matter. But if you want something from AVD, you can go to our VM order line, you can go to that service catalog, you can request those items. That will you'll fill in a form. Those forms will then set a webhook. It will hit Azure DevOps. That will then go and trigger the build out of that VM. It will apply a power plan to that device based on the requirements you specify in that form, and it will build that VM based on the t-shirt size VM SKU that you picked as well. But we use an alias that is, let's say, user friendly, and in that way users are able to pick and choose the VM that they're going to be using later on. We're able to then provide a level of feedback via that form back from the pipeline to ServiceNow, so they know how it's progressing. We can deploy a VM, in 20 minutes. So it's really not much of an issue, but it's just for that user experience from a requesting perspective. With Azure DevOps, we are homing all of our pipeline runs that provision, lifecycle manage, and ultimately offboard all components of the AVD platform. I suppose some key callouts here are just in respect, and I talked about earlier, but we use this for our image deployment, all of the resources, any changes to network rules, any sort of configuration changes to the wider platform, maybe RDP redirectional properties, all of that kind of good stuff. So anyway, once the pipeline is off and running and building a VM, it would hit the Azure Resource Manager. It will take an image that has already been provisioned into the Azure Compute Gallery and has spat out an image template. It will take that template. It will use that as the foundation for the VM that is going to get deployed into your subscription. It will be put into, it'll be registered, I should say, into a host pool. That registration it ensures that all the host pool configuration is true and applied to that particular VM. And then what you get, as talked about previously, is a spoke. And in that spoke, you'll have your subscription resources for that particular session host, set of session hosts. For us, we have, as I called out previously, a cloud proxy on all of these devices. So we would have had to have pre-provisioned and pre-configured and got that proxy onto those machines so that they can communicate out. That spoke is then in turn connected to the hub, and we use the hub for a number of different things. So we use the Azure firewall. We had set up a number of rules on that, so that if there was traffic bound for the internet, we would send it straight out from the Azure firewall straight to the internet and not send it back to bank. If it's destined for on-prem, then we would send it back down the express route. Or if it was bound for some key URLs that support the healthy function of the AVD service, then those will go straight across to Microsoft. And in turn, you can see here the different kinds of resources that get interfaced with via AVD. The other key call out is around Intune, certainly for AVD Personal. If that's your device configuration tool, then Intune is quite key, as it would be for a physical device, to ensure the config management is appropriate and is has all the applications, etc., that you want it to have. For us, because we use the Microsoft Managed Desktop service, they have access to every instance of Intune that we have productionized and use in our route to live. And so in that way, there is multiple instances of Intune and not just the one. And as you can see there, we're doing the common thing of syncing all the various objects from on-prem AD into Azure AD to ensure that things work as intended. So if I pull back a little bit, What you're seeing there is effectively a repetition of that design 3 times because we have 3 different environments. And the only real difference between dev test and production is actually the sizing of the VM subscription. So we use much less IP addresses because we don't obviously need them. We just need to have a couple in there just to prove that that the resources are working and functioning. And then we can rapidly promote change. Once we're happy with what we've done in dev test, into pre-prod as our staging environment, and then ultimately into production. And so in this way, we've achieved that goal that we were very keen to reach, where we have representation all the way through in our route to live. It's allowed us as well to move away from configuration workbooks, very onerous Excel spreadsheets, defining every piece of configuration, and move into that whole definition in code, and therefore get all of the vested interested people to review code when it comes to times of change, including security, and to move away from that configuration workbook approach, which has been greatly sped up our delivery, although there's still some way to go. But yeah, it's been a very positive story for us. Right, moving on to some lessons learned. So for us, delivery was challenging at points when we were delivering AVD personal. I won't lie. We were definitely up against it. We had a Windows 7 remediation risk that we were trying to face into. So there was a lot of pressure and a lot of focus on it. But looking back, I would say that if you are going to start on your AVD journey, then I would think about breaking it down into and mapping your workloads into the 3 distinct VDI scenarios, so AVD personal, multi-session, and remote app. I suggest you would start with AVD personal first, because you need less architectural components in Azure to be functioning and working before you start seeing value, which is positive. And I would say do that as an MVP. It will definitely be larger than you expect because of just the amount of different areas that an AVD delivery will touch upon. And then, but once you've done that and you've built confidence and there's a comfort level, let's say, across your organization that personal is working well, then you can start thinking about lighting up the additional components required for multi-session and remote app, particularly storage, FS logics and things like that. The other thing as well is we delivered in Agile to demonstrate incremental value to our stakeholders, of which there were many. And we found that overall Agile was a good way of delivering AVD. And indeed, we've as we've moved into moving out of just a pure change delivery into a more dev and ops BAU scenario, we still continue on with Agile and find it works well. In terms of technical, yes. So Lloyds unfortunately was building out its new landing zone and the foundational platform as we were trying to build out AVD. And so I would strongly recommend you don't do that and you get your landing zone absolutely done and dusted and buttoned down. You're very happy with it before you start trying to layer on top something like AVD. So that means that you get your network architecture figured out. You've done your management group design. Your Azure policy is functioning and working, and you've figured out how you're going to do resource tagging for FinOps. There's more to that I'm sure you guys will be aware, but there's a lot more than that to a landing zone. But absolutely, these are absolutely critical things you must get finished and done before you layer AVD on top. Otherwise, you'll have loads of back and forth, loads of code rewrites, loads of governance pain otherwise. So strongly recommend this one. You will also need some supporting services to be functional and working. So Image Factory / Image Factory or the Azure Compute Gallery, everything around image management needs to be functioning and working. And you'll also need to think about having completed your DevOps runners piece so that you've got internal agents. I anticipate that if you go down the DevOps route, you'll predominantly be doing it with probably Ubuntu runners, and this is another piece that you'll want to have completed. It may well live well outside of the AVD team directly. It's worth good interlocks, good conversations with those teams on how you can leverage those capabilities. Finally, really want to call out, make sure that you're if you, I would strongly recommend that you go down the infrastructure as code approach and think about being able to do that in either Bicep or Terraform. So I'll carry on. Finally, on this slide anyway, there is an awful lot of very good and rich resources available to you on GitHub. Microsoft have Microsoft/community folk have put together something called the AVD Accelerator, as well as the curated ARM library, and they are brilliant resources if you are new to the codification of infrastructure. The AVD Accelerator will allow you to be able to spin up a basic architecture of AVD in, I would say, within a week, providing you've got all the prereqs that Ian called out. Whereas if you want to start doing it with a little bit more fine tuning, let's say, and you want to get really into the weeds, the curated ARM library will give you very mature Bicep modules that you can apply and consume without having to write your own. And again, that will just really speed up your deployment. Some other areas. Don't do what we did and start an AVD journey without getting all your networking bits and pieces aligned. We don't have a layer 7 aka URL aware firewall on-prem. That causes no end of fun and games trying to keep up with IP address changes on the back end of all the core URLs that make AVD function and work. We also went through a very painful journey with our proxy tool on the devices where it would not do the URL bypasses correctly, and we had to work some very long nights working with that particular vendor to get it working and functioning as intended. So what I'm really trying to call out here is there's a lot of auxiliary things that will impact significantly on your AVD delivery, and it's worth having a good checklist of all those areas and facing into those as you can. I'll sort of speed up and just move on to the last bit about MS Teams. So Teams has been very well received in AVD overall with the optimization features, and we get all the the good stuff that you can imagine out of that collaboration piece. We've really felt like over the last 6 months that there's been a real catch up between what were the features offered on a physical device versus a virtual. And we feel like, from what we're seeing, that irrespective of whether you're connecting from a Windows machine or a Mac as well, and that you get a very good overall user experience. And we've been really, I hate to say it, but very pleasantly surprised at how well it's performing for us. And we have very little in the way of tickets overall for this after that initial implementation phase. Next bit is around understanding the business and in terms of lessons learned. So we had a very long-standing previous VDI platform that had been around for 10+ years. We had a lot of different workloads on there that weren't understood well enough by the platform team. And so as a result, when we came to do transformation, we observed all kinds of funny use cases that we weren't anticipating. People were using VMs as DevOps runners, and they were using devices for all kinds of their own automation and wanted them running 24/7, i.e. workloads that should have really been on a server, not a VM. And many similar things like that. We also didn't understand well enough all of the workloads underlying network requirements, and so and there just wasn't enough documentation around either to reference. So when we came to do a transformation for given business units, we ended up having lots of mini projects because we could offer them out Azure, but there was a lot of other things that fell out at the back of it that we hadn't accounted for. So that required new designs, more governance, etc., etc. So there was the core delivery that had all these spoke deliveries off the back of it. So we'd really encourage you guys to really think about understanding your business as well as you can before you start on your own respective AVD journeys. People, so AVD spans an awful lot of different technologies, and you need both technical breadth and depth to be able to deliver AVD and deliver it well. And things like networking, DevOps, GitOps, identity, monitoring and alerting, device management, security, and so it goes on. It's highly unlikely that all of those teams are going to live in have all those skills in the AVD team, highly unlikely, and it's highly probable that they won't even necessarily be in the same directorate as you. So really would encourage some stakeholder management of all the various teams, lay out your vision, where you're going, why you're going there, and to take those various teams on that journey with you. Some of them, maybe these teams are very already well advanced and well on this journey, and you won't have much friction. On the other hand, we found that there was a lot of teams who had, let's call it on-prem technology thinking, and there was an awful lot of winning over and explaining and re-explaining the differences coming with AVD, but why they weren't necessarily a challenge to the bank's overall security. For our deployment, we were a team of ultimately 8 engineers, 5 seniors and three middleweights. We did augment with contractors, but I would caution that because code is inherently so bespoke to every environment, that if you go down the contractor route, to think carefully about knowledge retention and succession planning, because you don't want to lose certain people and then all that knowledge go with them, especially if you've got a large platform with many users now living on top of it. What else would I call out here? Yeah, I think I've covered that one. Cool, almost finished. So looking ahead, very similar to some of the things being called out by Ian. We're going to start thinking about a POC for making the VDI the primary device for all new users joining the organisation. We're exploring what that might mean and what that might look like. So your primary device is virtual and you can connect to it with whatever device you want. Still in the early stages of that thinking, but it's something that we'd like to explore. We're going to continue on with our migration away from everything Citrix, basically, and enable remote app and multi-session. There's a whole bunch of cost optimization and platform improvements we wish to make, and it's particularly around keeping that platform evergreen too. We're on an evaluation journey of Windows 365, DevBox, and similar features that are of a virtual nature, let's say. We have some real interest for us in those areas to augment what we've already achieved with AVD. And then some of the other pieces there are very similar to what Ian's called out. So on that note, I am going to pause for breath and stop presenting. Thank you very much, everyone.